The U.S.-China trade war, which escalated sharply between 2018 and 2020, marked one of the most significant economic confrontations of the modern era. At its core, the conflict revolved around the imposition of tariffs, essentially taxes on imported goods, by both countries, each targeting hundreds of billions of dollars worth of each other's products. The rationale behind these tariffs was complex, rooted in issues such as intellectual property theft, trade imbalances, and the desire for fairer market access. However, the question of who is winning the trade war is both nuanced and contentious, with arguments and data supporting both sides. To truly understand the impact, it's essential to look beyond political rhetoric and examine the economic realities faced by both nations, their citizens, and the wider world. One of the most prominent arguments for why some believe the United States came out ahead in the short term centers on the structure of the two economies. The Chinese economy is heavily export-driven, with a significant portion of its growth and employment tied to manufacturing goods for foreign markets, especially the United States. When the U.S. imposed tariffs on Chinese goods, it struck at the heart of China's economic engine. By contrast, while the U.S. does export to China, its economy is less dependent on those exports. This fundamental imbalance provided the U.S. with a form of leverage that many policymakers believed could force China to the negotiating table and, perhaps, compel concessions on issues like technology transfer and state subsidies. The impact on Chinese companies was immediate and profound. Many manufacturers in China rely on access to the vast U.S. consumer market, and the sudden imposition of tariffs made their products more expensive and less competitive. As a result, some Chinese firms faced declining sales, leading to job losses and, in some cases, factory closures. The ripple effects extended into Chinese communities, where reduced income and employment opportunities began to erode confidence in the broader economic outlook. Another significant development was the shift in global supply chains. As tariffs made Chinese goods less attractive, some American companies began to look elsewhere for manufacturing partners, moving operations to countries such as Vietnam, India, and Mexico. This shift was not instantaneous or easy. Rebuilding supply chains takes time and investment, but it signaled a potential long-term reduction in U.S. reliance on Chinese manufacturing. For the U.S., this was viewed as both a strategic and economic win, potentially reducing exposure to future disruptions and strengthening relationships with other trading partners. The U.S. government also collected billions of dollars in tariff revenue as a result of these measures. While this influx of funds was touted by some as a benefit, it's important to note that the burden of these tariffs was largely shouldered by American importers and, ultimately, consumers. Tariffs are paid at the border by the importing company, which often passes the increased costs down the supply chain, culminating in higher prices for everyday goods. Nevertheless, the optics of increased revenue and apparent pressure on China contributed to the narrative that the U.S. was coming out ahead. However, the reality of the trade war's impact is far more complex when considering who truly bore the brunt of these policies. Consumers in both countries found themselves paying more for a wide array of goods. In the United States, prices rose for products ranging from electronics and appliances to certain groceries and clothing. For many families, these incremental increases added up, straining household budgets. In China, retaliatory tariffs led to inflation in some sectors, further squeezing consumers. American farmers and exporters faced their own set of challenges. When China retaliated by imposing tariffs on U.S. agricultural products, it effectively cut off access to one of the world's largest markets. Soybean farmers, in particular, were hit hard, with shipments to China plummeting. In response, the U.S. government provided billions of dollars in aid to affected farmers, but these subsidies could only partially offset the losses and uncertainty caused by the trade war. The effects were not confined to the U.S. and China alone. The trade war created a climate of uncertainty that reverberated throughout the global economy. International businesses, unsure of how long the tariffs would last or whether they would escalate, postponed investments and delayed expansion plans. Global trade volumes slowed, and growth forecasts were revised downward. For emerging markets dependent on trade, the fallout was especially acute, as reduced demand rippled through supply chains and financial markets. Small businesses, both in the U.S. and China, found themselves at a particular disadvantage. Unlike large multinational corporations with the resources to absorb higher cost or the flexibility to shift production, smaller firms often had no choice but to pass on increased expenses to customers or absorb them, eroding already thin profit margins. For many, the trade war represented an existential threat, forcing difficult decisions about layoffs, closures, or even bankruptcy. In the short term, it's tempting to view the U.S. as having the upper hand. The American economy, with its vast domestic market and diverse industries, was better positioned to weather the immediate storm. China, with its greater reliance on exports to the U.S., faced more significant disruptions. Yet, the notion of winning a trade war is inherently problematic. While one side may appear to suffer more in the immediate aftermath, the long-term consequences are far-reaching and often negative for all involved. Over time, both countries have absorbed significant economic pain. China has had to accelerate efforts to diversify its economy, focusing more on domestic consumption and alternative export markets. The U.S., meanwhile, has grappled with higher costs for consumers and ongoing uncertainty for businesses. The broader global economy has also suffered, with slower growth and increased volatility. Ultimately, the trade war has underscored a fundamental truth about global commerce. In a deeply interconnected world, economic conflicts rarely produce clear winners. Instead, they tend to create a landscape where everyone loses something, be it higher prices, lost markets, or diminished trust. While the U.S. may have gained some leverage and forced a reevaluation of global supply chains, these gains have come at a significant cost to consumers, farmers, exporters, and the stability of international trade. As the world moves forward, the lessons of the U.S.-China trade war remain relevant. Policymakers, businesses, and consumers alike must grapple with the realities of economic interdependence and the challenges of navigating an increasingly multipolar world. The true measure of success may not be found in who won the trade war, but in how both nations and the world adapt to the new economic landscape it helped to create.